Thanks for inviting me. And when Craig asked me, what was this? What was the title of my thing? It was like, who would have thought? If somebody had asked me a year ago, Don, come up with like the craziest sort of disruption in ministry for you, and I would maybe I would have thought like the building got swallowed by a sinkhole, something like that. But I just never would have imagined a pandemic, and it just hadn't really registered with me that was a possibility, and I wasn't around for the Spanish flu, thankfully, so. It just was a strange thing. But I thought, I'd give you, spend a few minutes just kind of talking about some of the impact of that, and then open it up to questions. Glad to, try to respond to whatever, is on your mind. But I need to tell this group that being with you, Christmas at your luncheon, Christmas of 2016 was probably one of the most critical 2 hours I've spent with any group that I can imagine in my entire ministry at Westminster, in terms of impact of the life of this church during this pandemic. You may or may not know this story, but a number of years ago, before that, we had a gathering of trustees and elders, sort of a January officer retreat. And we spent the entire morning together in Spelman Hall reviewing, sort of visions and dreams and things we were hoping for and pondering in terms of ministry. And we sort of put together, it's up on the, a big sheet of paper up on the wall in Spelman there, what are some of your dreams for, Westminster, and there was a list of like 30 some things. And everybody had a chance to write those, and we put them all, up on that list. And the list included live streaming worship. And I put that on the list. And then everybody got like 3 votes, and you could go up and like check off or put a post, I can't remember, maybe a sticky post-it where you wanted, or put a mark by, and everybody got 3. So, they all got a chance, everybody, and there were, like 30 some people there. So that's 90 plus 100, votes of live streaming. Got 1 vote out of that entire group, and it was me. People were like, they just. So fast forward to Christmas lunch, Radley Run with retired men, and I was at table with a couple folks in this group, and some of you may know who that is. I try not to announce people's names in sermons, so I won't do that here, but the couple guys at the table with me immediately perked up and said, I think that's just a superb idea. And some of that, I think, probably had personal experience behind it, recognizing times in their own lives or households where that would have been an opportunity to continue to worship when they weren't able to. And long story short, out of that came some generosity that kickstarted our ability to procure the hardware that it takes.
Yep.
you know, significant generosity to do that. And in the fall of 2017, we began to live stream. So I need to thank you for the fact that it was this group's invitation for me to come to lunch free. That's even better. I got a free lunch. and you know,
good one too.
a great lunch, and you know, a significant portion of the hardware purchase gifted out of the conversations that were taking place at that table. And you know as well as I do that this is, you know, we were so fortunate. I mean, other than, you know, the televangelists, you know, who have been, you know, on the television forever anyway, most churches were not, you know, live streaming. And many of my colleagues are still recording sermons from their living rooms and, you know, piecing things together. And it's one thing to be in the sanctuary in the pulpit preaching to a camera, but I'll tell you, preaching from my sofa in the den, just it would be a challenge. The other advantage we have, and you've seen it if you've been in worship with us, is, you know, we have several years of recordings of Westminster worship because of our live stream. So we get to see the congregation and the choir and, you know, engage again with what it means to be in one another's company. So that, I mean, it was, and who would have imagined that this would be the outworking of, you know, a conversation over lunch with, you know, the Tuesday morning fellowship group. And it has kept us engaged. So most of you have probably heard, but our worship attendance, we figure, is probably somewhere in the 2,000 people range, which is more than double what we were doing in person. We have over 1,000 individual IP addresses tuned in this past Sunday. And we kind of generally double that because we know we have families of 4. And although Marist Grove had issues last Sunday with switcher, so they weren't able to see on the TV channel like they usually do. You know, when Marist Grove's on the TV channel, one IP address accounts for everybody at Marist Grove who's watching. And I know there's more than 4 or 5. I'm thinking there's even more than 40 or 50. I'm thinking there may be 104 or 5. We were averaging 80 to 90 in their chapel. So anyway, it's just a huge thing.
But it also goes to show, Don, is that as old guys and gals can have good new ideas. And the other thing is, you know, Socrates and Plato believed you couldn't be a philosopher king till you're at least 60, because it took that long to gain wisdom. So whenever you want wisdom, just come to us. We'll be happy to give it.
There you go. Well, let me think. I was probably, I might have been 58 when I first suggested that idea and couldn't get any traction with the rest of the leaders. So, you know, I was getting close to that point of wisdom and vision, but it was, you know, let me just kind of run through quickly some other things that I've noted, you know, sort of who would have thought. You may or may not know that we have a fairly significant percentage of the staff that is 65 years of age or older. And, you know, obviously some retirements that were planned didn't happen. And with one, you know, potential retirement that was expected to be a little further down the road that did happen. Sue Spots didn't retire. She's stepping aside. She's planning to do some other things, but I don't think she had planned to do it quite this soon. And I think the pandemic accelerated those plans for her. For some of the team, it's just been a really, really challenging time, and a time that has not felt very fruitful because you're not engaging, face to face with people in sort of real time, real life. And obviously you can imagine children's ministry, over Zoom is I mean, it may be tough with old folks, but boy, with 5-year-olds, it's a whole different ballgame. But it's also pushed staff out. In some people who may have considered retirement at a certain point during this season may have pushed those out a little bit. And one of the challenges for me is we talk about this in personnel all the time is we don't want like 8 staff members all retiring at the same moment. It would be difficult for the church to sort of be under that kind of gun in terms of staffing. I've also started to have conversation with folks, and I said, if you all decide you're going to wait until I retire, and then you're all going to leave at the same time, it's not going to be a very nice thing to the next head of staff who's going to spend their first 18 months with 12 search committees. And that would be a real challenging time. So that's a conversation that we're picking up now as a team and trying to discern, what timing is like. Most of you know that we received a loan, one of the PPP loans for a little $290-some thousand, which kept us basically afloat this past year. Giving was robust and good, and people were very responsive all year long, for which I'm grateful. But there's about $150,000 of income that we didn't get because we had no Christmas concerts, because our preschool shut down. And once we passed March 8th, there was no cash in the plate. And our cash in the plate is about $40,000 a year. We got some in January, February, March, and then that disappeared. And of course, we missed Easter and Christmas cash, which those are the big Sundays for dollars in the plate. Our preschool generates about $70,000 a year to offset building costs and custodial costs, and we only got a partial year from that, and yet we've still paid custodians full time and all the way through, and Christmas concerts probably net us close to $40,000 after everything's paid for. So making up $150,000 out of a $2.5 million budget is nothing to sneeze at. So the loan helped us out, and Donna did amazing work, and it's now officially a grant as opposed to a loan that we have to pay back, and we will end up with a good surplus the coming year. Good pledge response, but we also, there are a number of people who have let us know that they will give as they are able this year, people who have pledged for years, because their world has changed, and we understand that. So that's been different. Working from home has been, I think the team has discovered that they're able to do a fair amount of things from home. It in some ways takes more time. Zoom meetings, take time to schedule and do. What I really miss the most is the impromptu conversations in the hallways. John, Jenny, Ann, come here. Just let me run this by you for a minute. And now I have to email them or text them and say, okay, here's the Zoom. Get on the Zoom and let's all, and you can't have the same kind of informal conversation on Zoom because you end up, talking all over each other. And that's different. Pastoral visits over Zoom aren't quite the same as sitting down with somebody in their hospital room. And I probably miss that as much as anything else. Um, I've done a number of funerals, and I've not sat down with families. We've done family meetings in preparation for funerals over Zoom, and had a couple of people say, "Oh, I'm Don, I want you to meet my kids." And I said, "I want to meet your kids, but I don't want to meet them when I can't see their face. You come to my office, everybody's going to have a mask on. I can't tell whether they're smiling or frowning at me when I suggest something." So I've met a number of people's children on Zoom as we've prepared for, a spouse's funeral. Not the way I like to do things. It's much more meaningful to be in person, but that's one of the changes we've had to work through. We're doing a fair number of funerals, and we have probably, I don't know, we probably have 8 or 10 in the queue. Folks who are waiting until there's an opportunity to gather with more people, and which I fully understand. And we did our first inurnment in the ossuarium a couple of weeks ago. Marion Stevenson is the first to be inurned out there, and it's been a very different time, but the streaming has also been amazing there. We did a funeral in the summer that had 290 IP addresses dialed in for that funeral service, and from all over the world. And that's been another huge gift that's provided. Some of you may have heard, if you heard Sunday's sermon, we did 3 Christmas Eve in-person candlelight services in the middle of the Christmas Eve monsoons. And we went back and forth and debated whether to do, not to do, and finally said, by golly, we're just going to stay the course. And it was hard keeping candles lit. But as I said Sunday in the sermon, hearing Westminster voices together out loud say the Lord's Prayer was incredibly emotional for me. I just hadn't realized how different it would be to hear a group of people pray together. We're not speaking out loud in the sanctuary other than the person who's praying, and it's so there's a real hunger for that, and I'm optimistic enough about the vaccines that I expect that will be the only Christmas that will ever be like that for me. I'm whatever it takes. I'm praying that we are back in person, and I won't complain about 6 services on Christmas Eve and all the craziness that it takes to pull that off, and how wound up I am when I get home and 1 a.m. after Christmas Eve, and Linda has to sit up with me till about 3:30 before I can actually go to sleep. We just sit up with a glass of wine and the fire going and listen to the Pope in Rome or whatever, but it was a very, very different Christmas for a lot of folks, and I look forward to this year being, different. Yeah, and I think we will talk more about, outdoor services. We already started talking as a team about, Ash Wednesday. We did drive by ashes a number of years ago. Maybe we'll do that. We're thinking we might order swabs, like they stick up your nose for tests, but so that we could actually put ashes on if people wanted to. We're going to host we're actually, Presbytery is trying to do worship for, provide services, videos of services for pastors who just need a break, solo pastors. And so I said, yeah, we can do any one of these services up, through Lent. Just let us know. We've got, so they picked Ash Wednesday as the one Westminster's hosting for the Presbytery. So we'll have a service in the building. Whether or not we'll have people will is yet to be seen, but we're thinking we'll do drive-by ashes. I'm thinking already sunrise Easter morning, depending on where we are with people and in person. I'm thinking we're going to be doing what we did on Christmas Eve, out in the circle in front of the church, candles and in person with people out there, and trying to think of other opportunities for us to gather. It's, you know, it's been a strange adventure, and you know, I had one colleague who announced his retirement in September, a large comparable sized church in Southern California, in Pasadena. And Jeff's a month younger than me, and he and his wife bought a house in Nashville near their children. And so he announced his retirement the second Sunday of September, and he's retiring in June. And I called him and I said, Jeff, I'm just having a hard time imagining what that must have been like to announce to an empty congregation, you know, that you were retiring, and God's blessings. And it's just been a really strange time, and yet life goes on. We continue to minister. I look forward to when we get people back in the building, and I'm getting the first vaccine that's available whenever they let me. This is when I'm glad to be 65 or more. I got my mega flu shot this year, and anyway, that's I mean, that's kind of a quick heads up. I'd love to try to respond to questions. I see Dan.
Yeah, Dan has his hand up. Dan, you got to unmute though. Dan, you're muted.
Dan, I think if you just push the space bar, it'll unmute for you also. You just hold it.
I got it.
There.
There you are. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm seldom mute. Yeah. Dan, thank you for everything. How much of this is going to live on, do you think, in terms of we talk about the pluses and the minuses, and some of us are over zoomed and so on, but how much of it's going to live on?
You know, it's hard to say, Dan. But I do think there are ways we're going to continue to connect virtually that we weren't before, which I think will expand our ministry. I think I've had a lot of people say to me, Don, you know, I've actually been worshiping more, not just because there's nothing else to do on Sunday morning, but because even like when we would go down to our place at the shore, we just never turned it on. Well, now we do. And we found, you know, this really meaningful. So I think there's going to be an increased attendance. I think there will be fewer people coming back to the building, certainly initially, and maybe for some time. And some of that is just the comfort level of people, and confidence in, you know, vaccines, whatever else. And the other is some people say, you know, I've really appreciated, you know, being able to worship, not have to do the 25-minute commute and get showered and get dressed. And, you know, my wife and I, you know, have breakfast together. And I mean, there are people who've found it meaningful. I think we've had some really robust adult education classes. You know, I think there were 46 or 47 at Sunday's class, the color compromise. And, you know, it's not the same as being in person, but, you know, I think are there ways that we would continue to try to make classes available virtually, even when we're meeting in person. But, you know, beyond that, Dan, it's hard for me to know. I think, I think there's been some, you know, questions like what kind of a choir will come back. And, not everybody in the choir would qualify as a spring chicken, probably. And will a number of them consider this an opportunity to say, you know what, I had my tour and it's time for me to retire from singing in the choir. I think that's one of the things we've talked about. And might we have a choir of 40 instead of a choir of 60? And how does that impact, and doesn't concern me, but it's a change that this may have precipitated or facilitated. I think there's some other things, Dan, we're wrestling with. We already have offering boxes in the back of the sanctuary. We're considering the possibility that we would not pass plates again. We're considering the possibility that we would not pass communion plates again. Considering the likelihood that we will pass the peace, but we won't do it by shaking hands or hugging. And we may stand at the door as pastors with our arms in straitjackets so nobody tries to shake our hand. Or we just have a lot of hand sanitizer, right? And we're trying to debate what we feel comfortable with. And I think we had this conversation yesterday. Most of us were like, yeah, I've been doing my hand sanitizer every Sunday after shaking 100 hands anyway. So, if people decide they want to do that, we'll just make sure we got, sanitizer around. I think we'll get past this pandemic for sure, but we recognize there's a certain vulnerability to other things, and being safe and smart is wise. Obviously, limiting the increase of flu is not a bad idea. We dispensed with passing the peace and doing communion a couple times in the past. So we're just going to think about things differently.
One comment, I think the idea of driving home, particularly as we become excessively mature, driving home from night on a late night meeting, particularly if the weather's inclement.
Right.
I think it's been good to not have to have people experience that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we will have to continue to look at, and whether it makes sense for leadership to continue to meet virtually, or consider, either some periodic meetings at a different time if they want to actually be in person. Daylight hours, Sunday afternoon, whatever. But I think, you think about in the economy, and I think about how many buildings in New York City are being considered as no longer necessary because companies are finding their ability to work virtually, and their employees, not spending an hour and a half each way in a commute.
It's mind-boggling.
Being productive. Yeah, it's a new, and yet I think we are going to return to a lot of things that were familiar. We are communal people, and being together, bodily is I think essential. So, other questions?
One thing, Don, for me that hasn't worked too well is communion by Zoom. It just doesn't have the same impact. And the local Catholic church up here, St. Elizabeth's, which is in the Exton, Chester Springs area, has done all the spacing. It's a very large church. You can, I think, probably easily see 2,000 people. So it's not that hard to space people out. And they have been continuing now with communion. They also have done, though, something which you brought up, of not passing the plate anymore. They have a central location at the back of the church where you put your offering in. So they avoid the passing of the plate. And the pastor told me that the donations have held up pretty well, even with the pandemic. One question I have beyond the pandemic, though, is why do Presbyterians only take communion basically once a month in service? I guess we also have done it in chapel too, though. So at least it's twice a month. Whereas in the Catholic Church, every Mass has communion. So where's the difference between Catholicism and Presbyterianism on the whole question of communion and how often?
I think that, there's probably a longer history lesson than we've got time for, but I'll try to sort of briefly. Presbyterians are required to have communion quarterly. And that's the Book of Order requirements. I think Calvin probably wanted it every Lord's Day, but there was a very strong reaction to the Mass and what was happening in the Catholic Church, related to a whole host of things that have nothing to do with communion itself. But so Presbyterians for a period of time, I grew up in a church that had it very infrequently. I think Westminster was 6 Sundays a year when I arrived, plus Maundy Thursday and Ash Wednesday. I think Christmas Eve. And one of the things that's happened, sort of in my career experience was what's been called sort of a liturgical renewal and an increased interest in the sacrament. Wasn't something that I was all that focused on or raised with, but it in working with colleagues and being in the midst of churches, it became more prominent. There's some folks who were very resistant to increasing the frequency of communion because of the concern that it would become, just commonplace and no longer special. And that's often been one of the arguments, that this is such a, holy thing. You don't want it to. And I remember hearing one of my favorite scholars, Walter Brueggemann, say, do you have a problem eating dinner every night? Do you not enjoy, having dinner? Then why is it that you can't imagine God could make each time you celebrate the sacrament, a holy time? We recognize that, there's challenges for us, with, a greater emphasis on congregational participation, a greater emphasis on the spoken word in preaching, a greater emphasis on music and choir and those kinds of things, that the amount of time it takes to do communion really reduces the length of time you've got in a service. A mass isn't a mass without Eucharist. So, you can't, it's got to be there. But our intention was, we're going to make sure it's available weekly, which ultimately ended up as being the chapel service. And we've increased the frequency. We went to, every single month, and we do it every Sunday during Lent and Advent in the contemporary service. It's a little more involved in putting, together the number of elements we need. And, some of it's just the infrastructure of doing it. So I think we're more frequent than a lot of Presbyterians. And I think the difference now in the Catholic Church, which isn't abiding by the state guidelines and is taking advantage of the fact that the governor has exempted churches, and we've chosen to follow the governor's guidelines simply because we don't believe we're particularly immune from the virus just because we're in worship. I think that the challenge for the Catholic Church is you can't have communion without the priest and being present there for the consecration. And in our theology, we can do that. And I personally think if Jesus can get from me and the table to you in the pews, Jesus can get from me at the table to you in your homes. And that's a theological difference, which I think has caused the Catholic Church to take advantage of not having government restrictions to be their guide because of that great need and desire for the members to engage with Eucharist, and I understand that. So,
Yeah, and it's also the bigger point that, you know, in the Catholic Church, we really do believe we're taking Jesus inside of us when we have communion, that it's really happening, you know, so to speak. Whereas it seems to be more symbolic in the Presbyterian Church, whereas in the Catholic Church, it's intrinsic.
I think the Presbyterian Church would say it's not symbolic. They would say Jesus is present. And Jesus is really present with us. In exactly what form is a mystery. We don't believe that the molecular structure of the bread and the cup have to change for Jesus to be present. I've always said, you know, if I get to, and it's a big if, obviously, if I get to heaven and Jesus is done, you know, it really was me. And I go, cool. You know, if God can raise Jesus from the dead, you know, Jesus can be contained in, with, under, through, around, beside those elements. I like to leave it as a mystery and say, I just know that he's present when we do that. So
I think
saw
Susan
Sue
had
had-
a comment.
No, I wanted to ask a question. It's great to be here and see everyone, first of all, and thanks, Don. Two things that you mentioned really kind of pulled some things from my heart that have been ongoing. And one was that life does go on and that we do seek to be in community. And of course, I've had the luxury of being home and having time to become more aware of all of the challenges around the world and within our country, including injustice and racism and hunger and, you know, you name it. It's all there. Life goes on. And as an individual, I've been struggling with where I can focus my energy and where is my empathy and where, you know, can I really make my small contribution with God's help. You know,
Right.
it's a hard thing. But then I think about the community, and I see Westminster, excuse me, particularly in our studies with the color of compromise opening the door to more education and awareness in that area. And I've seen Westminster do so much in the community. And I believe that the seeds have been planted and we're nourishing, you know, the growth in those directions. I don't understand and I'm not aware of the infrastructure of the leaders of the church. So I'm hoping you might speak to what discussions might be going on in terms of our community, looking at how life will go on within our community in the future.
Again, I think we continue to, you know, we're trying in every way we can to continue to express the love of Christ to people in need, you know, in a variety of ways. You know, we still have Stephen ministers, you know, meeting with people. We have people inviting folks to church. Some of you may have heard me say, you know, we have people joining the church who've never been in the building. And people are worshiping with us every Sunday. And part of that's because people are telling people, you know, how to connect. We're still doing, you know, food ministry and shelter ministry in the community. There's some pretty significant, you know, higher level conversations going on about attainable housing, using attainable as opposed to affordable, you know, maybe some congruence in both of those terms. And actually beginning conversations with some developers about whether or not any of Westminster's land could be utilized for, attainable housing purposes in this area. It- it- as you probably know or can easily imagine, this is the wealthiest county in the state of Commonwealth. I just have to say Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and attainable housing is a challenge. And so I think that's one of the things that we're continuing to focus on, that will be a community focus. How can we leverage, some of our assets, if you will, for the betterment of the community? And I think that the whole racism conversation that's been underway for a period of time is going to continue. I think education is just such a huge part of that. And there were some initial conversations taking place between, me and a couple other pastors in the community who pastor, historically Black congregations. Those conversations have sort of been set aside just because the pandemic, wasn't affording us any opportunity to do other things. But we've started thinking, could we, let's have a dinner with brothers and sisters in Christ from, a different ethnic congregation, just to sit and talk about what it means to be Christians in this day and age. So I'm looking forward to chances in this year to, open up and dig in further.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dave.
Don, we lost in going virtual about 10 people. And so I'm going to speak for them. They don't do email, some of them, let alone Zoom. So I'm wondering, I'm very impressed with Lynn's Thursday technical conferences. But what is our commitment to, if the only way to worship is through Zoom, you don't even have a microphone on your home computer, there are challenges for our worshiping community that may make us think in ways that we're not used to thinking, to make it available. And I would suggest that this would even be magnified when you go west in our presbytery and get out in the Lancaster area.
I think, there are a couple people on this screen who could speak to that, Dave, Nancy, and Ted both. And I'll say quickly, but we've had a group out of our Expand Our Witness team, which has been thinking expanding our witness both internally and externally, who have been working tremendously during this season, and they're making things happen. They're the ones who got the kiosks in the narthex. Well, those have been unplugged and they're sitting quiet until people come back in, but they're working on ways in which we can make this place more accessible to people when we do return. But during this season, the contacts that have been made to our seniors have expanded exponentially. And there's a group of, generally 10 to 12 people every Sunday who are worshiping with us over their phone, over a landline, not even a smartphone, who are dialing in. And there's a group, and Ted is one of them, and Nancy is another, and Joe and Christina Cumby, who are hosting. And that has become, I'll say it in an electronic form or a telephonic form, a house church. It is a group of Westminster members. It's the only thing they have in terms of technology is a telephone. They dial in to the service that's being hosted over Zoom. They get on the phone, they greet one another, they catch up, they share their concerns and their joys, and they worship together. And that's come because this outreach to our seniors has called people and said, what are you able to worship? Do you get the email? No, I don't have a computer. Well, here's a way we can do this. And it's, Nancy, Ted, you may want to say a word.
Well, I'm with the Expanding Our Witness for Seniors team. And yes, we figured out 2 years ago when we started that we had seniors who didn't have access to computers. And then it was just very interesting. One day, my daughter happened to see something on Facebook where there was a church up in Collegeville that was advertising on their billboard out front a call-in number for worship. And it was from that little clue that we were investigating, well, how could this come about at Westminster? And Joe and Christina Comby and now Ted Strand have become instrumental in being our hosts on Sunday mornings. And just as Don said, we have a group of people right now, 10 to 12 typically, who just listen on their phones, chat with each other, celebrate birthdays, celebrate milestones in their life before the service begins. And it's just been very gratifying for all of us.
That's wonderful.
I may be able to give you a few names.
That would be
I
fine.
would-
I have actually a printed sheet that I mail to people with the directions on it of how to access call-in numbers. So it's very simple then to read this set of numbers and then dial in on Sunday mornings.
And I wanted to mention in terms of, community, I have some family member that's in that situation with a landline. So she would call me and I would live stream the service and have the volume all the way up on and my phone on speaker, her phone on speaker. And it was great. Her church is now doing something sort of similar, but during the time when she had no access, you can do it one-on-one if needed,
Yeah, this is one of those things where we've learned how to address, ministry opportunities that weren't on our horizon or were falling through the cracks, and people who weren't able to connect with us, and recognizing that some of those people weren't able to be with us in person anyway. And had reached a point of mobility or infirmity where they were not able to be with us in worship. And now, for the first time, not just because of the pandemic, but for the first time in a couple of years, they were back worshiping with the community of faith. And that's been, so it's really been a meaningful opportunity. And I appreciate, Ted and Nancy and Joe and Christina, hosting that, every Sunday. It's just, and they report in. We get an email right after worship, who all was there, and the pastors just love it. I mean, we love knowing who's been with us.
That's kind of a reach out from extended communion, which people here are involved in. I mean,
Yeah, and that's been hard not to be able to extend the table personally in homes. And I look forward to the opportunity to return to that. That's so significant and so meaningful.
That's one of the ministries that I'm very involved with deaconship, is doing the extended communion and not being able to go to the nursing homes where we know people really need it.
Right.
It's been so sad and so tragic. I mean,
Right.
every Sunday I try to pray for those people because we can't bring them the sacrament.
Right.
And I just think in some ways it's devastating for them that we can't get to them.
Which is one of the reasons I go to chapel every Wednesday. And I love being able to worship with colleagues. I'm at my kitchen counter and I get a little shot glass and cracker, and I get to worship.
Oh, well, I'm going to make a pitch then for to recruit Stephen ministers. I'm not sure when the next training is, but that's another one-on-one where over the phone, landline.
Right.
So much can be done in terms of contact. So I have a care receiver that we're sort of retired and we're on to more of a friendship basis now, more social basis. But she's one of the people that really needed to be on the phone and listening, particularly through Christmas. So that helped too. And there's Stephen ministers in this group. But that's something I think too in the future that gives a really good opportunity for those connections within our congregation that could grow perhaps.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are ways that, we realize some of that can be done very well. In fact, what therapists are finding is some of their clients are much more comfortable engaging in psychotherapy over Zoom. They're not having to come out. They're not having to go into a strange office and sit in a waiting room. And, they can be in the comfort of their own home. And my daughter's seeing clients regularly. That's part of her position. She's faculty at Case Western Reserve in clinical psych, neuroscience, but she sees clients as well. And she has found, she has one client who's agoraphobic, a teenager,
Right.
and
Okay.
she's been able to be in therapy because of this, platform. So yeah, I think there's some things we clearly are learning will expand and enhance ministry opportunities. And of course, we have family members of church members around the country who are worshiping with us because they live in some little town in Iowa and their church isn't capable of doing anything or doesn't have the staff to do anything. We have one family, the guy emails me, he signs in every Sunday. His wife is the sister of a church member here at Westminster, and they worship with us every single Sunday, which has just been amazing. Other questions?
On
Nancy.
a happy note, I hope. I have a 3-month-old granddaughter, so we are eagerly looking forward to the church reopening so that we can have her baptized. And I'm just thinking there may be a bit of a backlog of baptisms that need to be done when our church reopens.
Yes, there will be. We figure we may just line them up in the front circle and get a hose out and we had actually started a conversation about doing that when in late October and early November, we piloted in person. We had ushers, trustees, basically officers entitled to come into worship, up to about 25 people in the room, because we wanted to make sure we had some people who could help host us when we got people back in, and we wanted people to see what it was like. And then we shut it down because the numbers, took off, and the task force said we need to go back to keeping things shuttered, if you will, at least in terms of in person. But we were talking about baptisms, and one of the challenges right now is how to do that while you're still having to social distance and masked and those kinds of things. And so we've worked on what the protocols would be, and yeah, we probably have a dozen. And we have some families who had one, and now because it's been so long, they now have another one. And so we'll be catching up with some households, but yeah, hoping before long. I'm hearing from the school system that it's possible by Easter time they may be back full time with students 5 days a week if their entire staff can be vaccinated. So it's that's been one of the challenges for schools. It's not just the spread; it's that you get teachers out and you can't staff your classrooms. So if they can staff rooms, they'll be better equipped. And so I'm hopeful that perhaps in the springtime we could be, and maybe even sooner. Presbytery has recommended not going in person through February. Our task force meets next week, and we'll pick up our conversation and take a look at where we are. And we're kind of doing month by month and being attentive to being safe while recognizing we want to get people back in the building as soon as it's reasonable and safe.
Our church staff as a group, part of the vaccination sequence?
We aren't in a, kind of a frontline worker category. I think probably those of us who are going to get it are going to get it first because we're 65 or older. But I haven't seen, church staff included in, second line. We're not in the same, group as teachers, and that, at least I haven't seen anything to that effect. I'm pretty sure the presbytery would be sharing that, but that may be one of the good things to us having such a large crowd of old folks on the team that will get vaccinated sooner than some other churches.
And I wanted to put a word in for Lynn George, and how much she's had.
Lynn has been amazing, and the session and personnel committee are very attentive to that, and are, we want to make sure nobody steals Lynn George away from us,
Right.
and that we have commended her, and she loves her job, and we love her. It's been amazing. She really has.
If they steal her, I'll grab her back virtually.
We're just going to make it impossible for anybody to want to come steal her.
Exactly.
So,
One last thing, I think I commend you and leadership for having the forethought to add her to staff too. That was good thinking.
yeah, it was a great move. Jerry McShane, began to push in that direction, and everybody on the team fully concurred. And it was, and again, who would have thought that our most critical person, and the good thing was, Christmas Eve, Lynn was actually away, and that next Sunday it was her first Sunday off since the pandemic, December 27th. And we're going to try to make sure that's possible.
Tell her we appreciate her.
Good. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to join you, friends. Great to see your faces, and I love, conversations I have with some of you who sign in regularly on Sunday mornings, and I get to catch up with some of you. It ain't quite the same as seeing you face to face, but I actually have more conversation with some folks via email other than the greeting, at the door. So grateful for the fellowship, and I'm off to a worship planning meeting with the rest of my team.
Thank you, Don, so much. It was very informative, very reassuring. And it's always good to be up to date on what the thinking is. It's terrific. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yep. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
And gals.
Thanks.